good afternoon. I would like to welcome you all to today's webinar on the role of Big Data Value Public-Private Partnership in the context of European data market. My name is Kasia Jakimowicz from Open Evidence, and I will be a moderator for today's session. Together with me today, we have Stuart Campbell, the Secretary General of Big Data Value Association, and Giorgio Micheletti, the Consulting Manager of IDC. Very briefly about agenda today, we're going to start with a short introduction of how the webinar works. Then Giorgio Micheletti will discuss the big data technologies and the European market study. Following the presentation of Stuart on the European Big Data Value Public-Private Partnership and the role of Big Data Value Association. After that, we're going to continue with Q&A session, and we're going to finish around 3 o'clock. This is it for the brief introduction. And now I'm going to give the voice to Giorgio Micheletti from IDC.
Thank you, Kasia. Thank you, everyone. Hello, everyone. My name is Giorgio Micheletti. As Kasia said, I'm representing IDC, so International Data Corporation, which is one of the primary market research and intelligence companies worldwide, I would say. My aim is in the next 10 minutes to provide you with a short overview of big data and data-related technologies from a market perspective, and then introduce you to the European data market, meaning the study that IDC, together with Open Evidence, is currently carrying out on behalf of the European Commission. So without much further ado, I will go through the next slide. I hope you see this perhaps funny graphic, the way that IDC uses to represent and describe the evolution of information and communication technology. We as IDC, and not only as IDC, interpret the current digital transformation process and the role that big data and analytics technologies, or big data and data-related technologies, have in this constant technology evolutions. So on the bottom of this slide, you see the first platform. This was back in the days of big mainframes and terminals. Then we passed to the second platform, which was characterized already by PCs and then by the user. Now we are in what we call the third format. So the third platform is actually shaped where technologies are growing. And it is built on 4 main pillars. So there is the mobility aspect, of course, there's the cloud computing aspects, there's a social business, so social media, which are becoming more and more social businesses, but precisely there is the big data and analytics technologies. Now, if we move to the next slide, I would say IDC is not only measuring or analyzing these technologies from a purely market perspective. So what we are also doing together with Open Evidence is measuring not just a single technology, so the big data per se, the analytics per se, but also what we have defined as the data market and the data economy. We are doing so with DG Connect, the European Commission, particularly on behalf of the data value chain unit, because the idea is to define, first of all, what is the economy. So what are the products and services that are enabled through the use of data, not just the data technology per se, but the panoply of different services and products that are stemming from that, to define the actors, define this market, and then to assess and measure the market per se. We are doing so in different ways. The principal way is to apprehend facts and figures on this newly defined data market and data economy, and we are doing so putting together and creating a data market monitoring tool. On the left-hand side of this slide, you've got this small image, and you have six, I don't know if you can see them, they're quite small, but you can see six indicators. So without going into the details, what we've done here was to create a model that could actually go and assess, I would say, the data market and the data economy from a holistic perspective. So we're measuring the actors of this economy, so basically who are the workers doing this. We're measuring the companies providing data related services and products. We are measuring the companies using these data services and products, and from this we are also measuring the revenues generated by these companies and the overall data market, plus the economy as a whole. Obviously, this is a huge, I would say, engagement. It's actually a 3-year project, and it's not only revolving around the quantitative assessment of these variables, but there is also an activity of qualitative research through a series of case studies that we are also taking into considerations, and there is an activity of, I would say, community building, and this is precisely what open evidence is particularly doing. And the example that you have on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, is the data landscape that we are building once we identify the key players moving around in this economy. So having said that, what is and how big is this so-called big data market? What I'm showing this is these three elements to put you in a wider perspective. If we look at the big data market per se, in other words, if we look at the technologies, then according to IDC, we have the number that you see on the left-hand side on the top. So we're talking of a market in Europe at around $3 billion in this case. So it's going to be a bit less if we measure this in euros. And this is a 2014 number. Now, if instead of looking at the technologies only, we are extending, as we are doing now in the data market study, we are extending the concept not to the technologies only, but also to the digital products and services that are derived from data that are precisely extracted and by the technologies. Then we have a much bigger number. We are already talking around 55 billion. Okay, again, US dollars, so around 50 billion in Europe. And the third element that you see on the right and are taking an idea of what sorts of size we are talking about here. The next slide is just a very few, I would say, just a few examples to convey a fundamental message here, is that while we are still working and analyzing and quantifying the actual size of this market, we came up evidence of the fact that this data market and the innovation that is stemming from precisely the production and the exchange of data-related products and services is already creating positive impacts in the European economy and in different sectors, in different parts of the European industry. I've just named here in this slide a few examples, but the concept is that, for example, here we have the retail sector. We have the manufacturing sector. We even have the public sector. The concept here is that the use of data and data-related products is clearly providing benefits when it comes to reduce costs, but also improve operations, improve quality, and improve the way companies, but also public agencies are providing services. Interestingly, we are already in a position through a series of studies to measure this impact. So that's the message that I would like to say. Let's take as an example the example of the public services. In the UK, the very fact of using, for example, technologies and data-related technologies and crossing data is helping the UK government to cut the time in identifying, for example, in this case, families who are eligible of benefits. So there is an effect on the different shown on the European economy as a whole. Again, we are still conducting the project. The project still has a full year to go on. So there will be repeated measurements of the data, of part of the data that I've been trying to describe so far. But what we realize, for example, in 2014, according to the model that we put together, there's already of overall GDP. We're talking money here, and we're talking of substantial effects. Finally, what I'd like to show you here before giving the word to Stuart, I would say when it comes to the actual data market per se, we have done our research and we have seen 50 billion was saying before. But we've covered the study also looking at the future. So we've forecasted this evaluation over the next 5 years. And we have developed 3 different scenarios. According to these 3 scenarios, this market is going to grow in different ways. Now, obviously, if I would say the normal scenario, so the baseline, as we call it, is going to prevail, then we will have a market growing from 50 to around 83. But it's interesting to see how the market could evolve if a challenging scenario would prevail, or if a high growth scenario would prevail. I'm saying this because the message here is that there are possible paths of growth of this data market. So it's up to us to shape the best conditions to make this market, to make the most out of this market, to make the market grow the best. So on this note, I would leave the words to Stuart, because what he's going to present is precisely one of the way of stimulating and supporting this market.
Joined right now. The microphones are off during the presentations. You can post questions using the question sign. You can also raise hand to get the voice. I'm gonna address all the questions and assign them to speakers during the question and answer session after the presentation of Big Data Value Association. And you can, and I can also give the voice to a specific person if they raise the hand. One more thing, because we had this question, all the video of the webinar will be available online after the webinar within 1 day on the website of EU Data Market Study. The website address is Data Landscape EU. .eu. And now to move on, I'm going to give the voice to Stuart.
Okay, so thank you everybody for coming to this seminar. Thank you from the introduction from Kasia and Giorgio, and I think that's a good introduction to what BDVA is, why it was set up to begin with. So my name is Stuart Campbell. I'm the Secretary General of BDVA, and I'm from an SME actually called Information Catalyst. So I'm going to tell you on the objectives of today, what is a BDVA PPP at a very high level? What is Big Data Value all about? And what is the BDVA association itself? And how can you actually be involved in all of that if this interests you? So moving along quickly. So, of course, with all those facts and figures you've just heard, you can imagine that there is a lot of attention to this area in the past years. I'm sure you know all of that yourself. So, of course, the European Commission and large industry in particular have decided to say, well, Europe should do something about this. So you can see on the screen there's various kind of quotations from the great and the good, but essentially saying, well, we need to do something in Europe if we're to take big data seriously at the end of the day. So what happened is in October the 13th, I think it was, in 2014, the private side, i.e. industry and also academia as well, and the public side, in this case the European Commission, came together to say, okay, let's make something happen, and they formed the Big Data Public-Private Partnership. And the Big Data Value Association, which I represents the private side of this. Okay, so this was at the launch event with Nelly Cruz, and this happened in the Berlaymont, and you can see the kind of joy and the excitement of big data in the handshaking ceremony to set up this particular partnership, which was announced in a nice fanfare. So before big data and after big data, that's the magic we hope to get from it. Looking at it more financially, what's been committed is that the European Commission will commit to this to the tune of about 500 million over a 5-year program, and obviously it expects commitment to this initiative from the private side as well. And the way we determine that commitment is really what we call the leverage effect. So there's some direct leverage, which is companies invest in big data technology themselves, typically ICT companies, but there's the indirect effect, which is by providing better big data technology, other companies, maybe not, let's say, directly in technology themselves, but the users can leverage that and make some money or improve efficiency. I should say that the BDVA and the BDV is very well supported. So the president of the organization is Jürgen Müller from SAP, with many other large organizations and also small organizations involved as well. For example, a vice president of Atos. So the other thing to remember is this was stimulated by actually the NESI European Technology Platform, for those of you who know about ETPs. So this itself had a lot of 450 members, about 24 key steering committee partners, people like Nokia and Thales and Indra and SAP, of course, but not just the NESI partners, other people as well. But one of the key things we wanted to get out from this is that whatever organization there was, we had certain principles, openness, transparency, etc., 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 and of course, very much a cross-stakeholder initiative, large companies, SMEs, research organizations, users. However, upon saying that, written into the statutes of BDVA and indeed the BDV PPP is the fact that it should be an industry-driven organization, and indeed it shouldn't just be about kind of technology and research, it should be about the wider areas. In terms of the structure, this is a classic public-private partnership structure. We have the public stakeholder, the commission. We have the private community, the Big Data Value Association, and we have a regular meeting of a partnership board where we have signed a commitment together to make sure things that happen. So it's really a contract. It's not just a kind of verbal agreement. Of course, we have all of these private stakeholders. I don't think you'll be surprised by that. And the overall ideal is about the BDV implementation. Now, broadly speaking, when we talk about that, we think Horizon 2020, for example, but it can be other areas. It could be in ITEA or Artemis or regional programs. Right now, our focus is definitely H2020, but it's about the overall implementation. And one thing to say is, you don't need to be in the Big Data Value Association or part of the Big Data Value PPP to be part of that implementation. Of course, we hope you are, but it's not a kind of compulsory thing. It's not an evaluation criteria. So to deliver all of that, of course, we've got some substructures. We've got a board of directors, task forces. There will be coordination projects. There will be research projects. But at the moment, what we're focusing on in the first year of operation, or the first 9 months of operation, is some task force, some subgroups to get things active and get things up and running. The commitments of the people who join the BDVA and the commitment to the BDV is, of course, this leverage I mentioned, but many other things as well. The principles of inclusiveness. We have specific objectives to get 20% of SMEs as participating organizations. We need to engage all players, not just the technology vendors, but of course the users and the data providers. And there's an overall governance and ecosystem model, which means we can all deliver on these aspects. In terms of the benefits, of course, we all want some benefits out of there. Of course, there's the general things: cooperation, promoting, contributing. But if you're looking at yourself individually, of course, at the end of the day, we are a voluntary networking organization. But we hope through this networking, as well as influencing others on something called the strategic research agenda, i.e. what should we do for big data in the next 5 years, that we get this ecosystem up and running and you can be part of it. And BDVA itself is a legal entity. So in terms of the timeline, well, we started in 2014. We go up to the end of the implementation of the projects, and as I'm sure many of you know, that there are already some first calls in Horizon 2020 which are quite geared to big data specific calls, but also many other calls are mentioning big data and data in general. So to quickly move on to the next step, what is Big Data Value and BDVA? Well, I'm sure you know what big data is. So here's a nice academic view. I'm sure you've all got your own. As hinted earlier on, we can take various different economic perspectives on it. You know, does it increase sales? Does it increase decrease costs? Can we make new business from it? And of course, it hits every single application areas and more than these as well. We also need to consider how big is big, because of course big data conjures up this volume aspect, but actually big data for IBM and CERN and SAP is very different to big in the context of a small SME like Information Catalyst. So what we talk about, of course, in big data is the volume, the velocity, the variety, the veracity, but what we're focusing on very much is the value, which I believe really includes somehow all the rest as well. But really, this is industry driven. It's about how does Europe turn data into money? How do we help growth? How do we help competitive? How do we help the societal challenges? So the value, here's some definitions of McKinsey, but yes, it's about, you know, some nice kind of principled things of segmenting customers and innovative business models, etc. But from a BDVA point of view, it's all of those things, but it's also, we're dealing with all sorts of data, so corporate data, sensor data, social data. So it's kind of everything in that particular landscape. We also, a big aspect is privacy, consumer protection, but it's other things as well. It's like skills. It's no good having great technology if we don't have the skills to do anything about it. And it's about this ecosystem of engaging with others to develop together, whether it's business models or technology. We need to do this together. So big data, BDVA is not just about data, it's also about the things you see on the top right, which are about skills, social, legal, business, applications, as well as the technical side as well. And it's about the full path of the data value chain, from the original acquisition of data to visualization and putting into implementation the data we find in the intelligence we get from it. BDVA currently has 111 members. It's one of the fastest, if not fastest growing PPPs. So obviously there's a big interest in this area, particularly considering all those members are paying. In fact, the funny thing is most of those members are full members, and there's a good balance between the two. We're a very open organization, but there are statutes, there is a vision to buy to, there is a contribution in kind as well as a monetary contribution. But I should also say that being in BDVA does not automatically mean you will be awarded some commission project. That's not the case either. So here's some samples of some names. You might have heard of them, and many more names are on our website as well. So in terms of what it's all about, the key thing is the PPP must make some impact. It must deliver on this competitiveness and the strategy and this growth. So we need to make impacts on technology participants to other stakeholder classes. So that includes, of course, research and technology things like transferring technologies, for example, from large organizations to SME, or from researchers to large organizations in SMEs. And we will do that through something we call iSpaces and Lighthouse projects. And for all of these aspects, we need a coherent framework. It's no good having bits of the puzzle. We want to complete the big puzzle for Europe. So to do that, there are, let's say, 6 main strands. We're dealing with the technology again, industrial leadership, research and innovation, the overall business and applications, this kind of ecosystem approach, but also the societal challenges as well, such as in health and energy and awareness. And of course, overall, it's not even just about big companies and SMEs, but the citizens and the overall awareness of big data, what it can do for society, is pretty important. So the way we will accomplish this is through a classical research project, but also something we call innovation spaces, which are hubs for you see the fields ranging from data management and to visualization. This is not to say that there might be some new fields coming up, and I'm sure if there's any researchers on the call, you can probably add to that particular listing. So iSpaces are these hubs. They are about bringing these different aspects together so that people can experiment. They can experiment perhaps on data, they can experiment on tool sets, they could experiment on legal and discuss things like that. But they are iSpaces, and effectively these are, I'm not quite sure what they're called in the call currently, it changes from day to day, but they're basically hubs of activity connected with data. Lighthouse projects, as they suggest, are large-scale demonstrators. So we can prove some of the technologies. Some of this technology is already there, but we can prove this technology and put it into implementation. And of course, all of these things, they interact together with a kind of cooperative agreement between everything to make sure we deliver on this ecosystem. So finally, I'm just going to finish off with a few words about the Big Data Value Association itself, and if this interests you and how you can be involved. So at the moment, we are composed of 10 major task forces, from impact and KPIs and metrics, because we have to perform, to looking at future work programs, to looking at strategic research agendas, from looking at business and skills and education. And actually each of those task forces break it down often into 3 or 4 subgroups. So we've got quite a kind of large pool of active people, around 300 people looking at all of this right now. Again, the task force is there in a little bit more detail. Of course, we have to do things like communication and community building as well, but the kind of leading task forces are about the program management, is about application sectors, domains, and about business impact. If you are interested, you can go to our website, bdva.eu. There's various information on there, and there are some forms you can fill in if you want to get some more information or to join our organization. There's different level of memberships. I'm not going to bore you with this table right now, but they range from being simply on a mailing list to actually being a full board member, and there's various implications involved. Of course, I did say we need to keep ourselves going, so it's not a free organization. The range is from very large industry in the 4 members down to €250 for the associated and the SMEs and the academic members. What's surprising, I think it's surprising, is that most people have gone for 4 membership, and this, I think, shows that people really believe in this strategy in the way ahead. So just to finalize, here you have my contact details as Secretary General. Please feel free after this to give myself a call. I'll of course answer any questions now or later. And as suggested, the PowerPoints will all become available. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stuart. I think we're gonna start with questions with people that raised hand. First person, Richard Stevens. I'm gonna give you the voice. Hello, Richard. Hi, Richard.
Hi. I actually don't want to ask a question at this point. Sorry.
Okay. Let's address the questions that we have from the participants. One of the questions, let me see, I have to find the question right now. I think I lost the questions. Where are they? Okay, one of the questions that we have, small innovative startups struggle to be involved in large public initiatives such as a public-private partnership. Good to see that an SME is holding the Secretary General and about the commitment to 20% of SMEs. But how do you reach out to innovative startups? Why should they be involved? And that's the question to you, Stuart.
Yes, so thank you for noticing that. In fact, the Paul-only SME of myself, and we're a micro enterprise. We not only are Secretary General, but also we coordinated the original proposal to begin with. And by the way, I would just say, none of us are paid for any of this work. We have a secretariat, but we're not paid for this work. And I would say to most SMEs, as I do, because I'm an advocate for SMEs, is first of all you got to bother. So most SMEs simply believe everything is delivered to them on a plate, but if you bother, you can achieve good things. You achieve it in business, and you can achieve it in voluntary organizations like this. On the other hand, of course, we need to outreach to as many SMEs as possible. So I think most of that, a lot of that, beyond some enthusiastic SMEs like Information Catalyst, needs to be done through accelerator organizations. So for example, some of these iSpaces I mentioned already, I know the one in France, I think is TerraLab, that has a lot of kind of relationships with SMEs. We have people like the Digital Catalyst organization in the UK as a member, and they have a very wide SME network. So I think it's difficult. I know this for many years, but at the end of the day, it can be done, but the SMEs have got to play their part as well.
Thank you, Stuart. Another question from Giulia Patuka. In the Big Data Value public-private partnership, there are resources to study data scientists and data science areas or not? So the question.
Yes, obviously from BDV and a BDVA perspective, you've seen that the overall remit is to look for data scientists, skills, training, knowledge workers, etc. And you've seen in the task force 10 is looking at that. In this particular call in Horizon 2020, there are some aspects related to that, and I think there's some in the next call as well, in the 17, 18 call. And obviously this is a very big topic. We need about another 100,000 knowledge workers and data scientists and those kind of people in Europe. And we know how hard it is to get any type of ICT people. So we need the universities, the academics, the training organizations, and of course industry to think about that particular problem, and that's what we're trying to do, and it's also what the Commission, the public side, is trying to do as well.
Thank you. Another question from Roberta Piscitelli. Where can we find more information about the task forces? How can we join one of them?
Okay, so in terms of the overall information is at the BDVA.eu website. On there, it's under the membership kind of drop down, and there's some high-level information about the task forces. Some were only approved relatively recently, so we need to update them a bit. However, to be a member of the task force, you have also to be a member of BDVA, so you need to kind of join BDVA itself. That's the task force are geared around that. On the other hand, some of you may have attended, we had a very successful summit in Madrid. The whole thing was organized in about 7 weeks, but we had nearly 400 people attending. We had 60 sessions. We had about 20 keynotes and 3 days of events, and an overall rating of about 99% of people felt it was a good event. We also do things like that to make sure we engage the wider community. That event was open to others. We will have further summits, further mini summits still to be arranged, but we want to be open, but we also are a membership organization.
Thank you. Another question from Vasiliki Panousi. Which is the biggest benefit that an SME can get from a full membership in the BDVA? Are the obligations of the members listed somewhere?
I didn't quite hear the last part of the question.
Are the obligations of the members listed somewhere?
Okay. Okay, yes, there is a set of statutes and governance. To be honest, most of them are pretty kind of generic administration aspects, but there's an overall phrasing, let's say, it's very high level, which said, you know, you must be committed to BDVA. It doesn't say exactly you should do this or you should do this or use that, but you should, you know, you should play your part in the organization. And the funny thing about such voluntary organizations, the more you pay, like big organizations, the more we expect you to contribute, let's say. So in terms of SMEs, what I speak for myself as information catalyst, what I believe you get out of BDVA is very similar to what you get out of all similar organizations. For me, it's about, I cannot influence somebody as a micro SME, but within a community I can have more influence. I cannot hope to extract everything from the ether to find out what's important and what big industry is doing, but in such an organization I can find it out. I can talk to some of these guys who basically I wouldn't be able to talk to, you know, in any other way. I can have an influence on the technology. I can help networking. Of course, networking is a key thing for most people, especially SMEs, to say, well, can I talk to these, you know, large organizations or academics to find out what new technologies are? So I think it's all the classical things you get from, you know, these type of organizations, but obviously in the context of big data technology or big data areas.
Thank you, Stuart. Another question, this time to Georgia from IDC. This is a question from Bernard Pedersen. How do you define big data? Why is your definition the right one?
Well, can you hear me?
Yes, we do. We can.
Big data is, I would say, is a new generation of technologies, right? And the definition that IDC uses is it's clearly a wide definition that encompasses the technologies that try to extract value from large volumes of data, and precisely enables these characteristics that Stuart was explaining before. So they actually capture the 4 V's that, or the 5 V's even, that that Stuart was referring to. So they enable they high velocity capture, discover, and to analyze big volumes of data. And I would say another element, so this is the core element. When we say in IDC big data and other data-related technologies, and we say big data and analytics, and another element that would probably define big data is the time element. So it has to be on the spot. So basically on almost real time. That's another fundamental characteristics of these technologies. So these processing of high velocity and high value and big masses of data in almost real time.
Thank you, Georgia. But I think it's also interesting to ask Stuart for the definition as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting one, and I'll be honest and say I think everybody really has their own definition. When the words big data started, I would say everybody was talking about, you know, exabytes and petabytes and bytes and whatever bytes of information, and we still see that, for example, in commission calls in certain areas. I personally think as things have moved on, people have realized there's actually, you know, only so many people with that kind of size of information. So the volume mentality of big data is decreased. It's still very important, but it's moved into other areas, such as, you know, the content in the media industry is very interested in big data. They're working with it. But of course, you know, a film or something like that can be, you know, God knows how much information in terms of terabytes and gigabytes and whatever bytes comes after that. But often it's about metadata connected with the film. So is that kind of big data, or is it just some metadata around it? I think that the key thing is what big data is becoming a kind of term to address all of these things, to address the veracity, to address the volume of different industries. Information Catalyst as a micro SME, I can tell you I'm not working with clients dealing with exabytes of data, but I am dealing with people dealing with data, you know, data velocity. So everybody is in it for their own particular picture, but a lot of the common mechanisms to process this are important, whether it's you know, semantics and metadata, or data privacy and data protection. They are often valid throughout whatever kind of facet you're looking at.
Thank you very much for your answers, Stuart. So as far as I can see, there are no other questions. So I would like to thank you all for participation in today's webinar. The video material from the webinar will be available on Data Market Study website, which is datalandscape.eu. I would also like to invite you to the next webinars to come. We organize webinars every month. The information about upcoming webinars will also be available on our website. So if there is no further questions, once again, I would like to thank you